Imagine a family whose very blood carries darkness, a curse so vile that entire generations vanish in silence. In the remote hills of Montana, 1876, the Donnellys lived hidden from the world, yet their secrets whispered across the land. Tonight, you will enter their story, but beware, once you hear it, you may never sleep the same again. If you love chilling mysteries like this, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more dark history stories. In the remote, mist-shrouded hills of Montana, 1876, the Donnelly farmhouse rose like a grim sentinel, its weathered wood sagging under the weight of unspoken secrets, and every creaking board groaned with a history so dark that the villagers dared not speak it aloud. They whispered of strange lights flickering in windows at midnight, of shadows moving without source, of sudden, piercing screams that shattered the still night air, and of children who vanished mysteriously, leaving only empty cradles and the hollow cries of grieving families, while animals instinctively avoided the property, refusing to step within 100 feet as if some invisible malevolence repelled them, and even the wind seemed to carry warnings, moaning through the twisted pines that clung to the hillsides, twisting and bending as though recoiling in fear, warning outsiders to turn back, for the Donnellys were no ordinary family. There was something about them that unsettled the soul, something ancient and unknowable that hid behind their pale faces and quiet voices, a darkness in their eyes that suggested knowledge of horrors far beyond human understanding, and their children, unnaturally calm yet disturbingly aware, seemed to perceive things unseen, moving silently through rooms as though guided by some whispering presence that only they could hear, while the very land around the farmhouse seemed alive with dread, each shadow stretching like tendrils, each fog-soaked hill concealing secrets that clawed at the edges of imagination, and those foolish enough to venture near reported feeling unseen eyes upon them, a suffocating weight pressing down on their chests, and whispers curling around their ears in voices that were almost human, almost familiar, but terrifyingly wrong, as if the hills themselves were alive, feeding on fear, drawing it into the Donnelly home where it seemed to thrum with life, echoing through the creaking halls, wrapping around the hearts of anyone who dared to look too closely, and the villagers, trembling at the mere mention of the family, insisted that the Donnellys' blood carried a malevolent force, a darkness that had been passed down for generations, shaping not only the family but the land itself into something unnatural, something that would linger long after the farmhouse crumbled to dust, leaving only the legend of a family whose very presence haunted the hills, whose story was whispered in fear, and whose shadow would forever linger in the minds of those who had glimpsed it. A chilling reminder that some secrets are never meant to be uncovered, and that curiosity in the face of darkness is often the first step toward eternal regret. The Donnellys were no ordinary family, and by 1877, whispers of their unnatural lineage began to spread like wildfire through the surrounding Montana hills. It was said that the family's blood carried a hereditary curse, a darkness passed from one generation to the next, manifesting in grotesque deformities, sudden fits of rage, and a chilling awareness of death before it even came, with villagers recounting tales of children born with strange markings, eyes that seemed to glimmer with knowledge far beyond their years, and the ability to predict calamities that would strike the community with eerie precision, while the adults, pale and unervingly composed, carried themselves with a quiet menace, as though every action, every glance, was calculated to instill unease, and neighbors swore that the land itself responded to their presence. The winds whispered warnings, the forest seemed to bend and shift to conceal their movements, and even the river that flowed nearby appeared darker, thicker, as if the water itself recoiled at the family's passing, while those who dared visit the farmhouse often reported headaches, nausea, and an almost magnetic sense of being watched, as if invisible eyes followed their every step. And on some nights, locals claimed to hear faint chanting, carried by the wind, a language no human could understand, emanating from the house like a warning from the depths of the unknown, while livestock near the property would fall ill or die suddenly, and the family's dogs, if any, behaved in unnatural ways, growling at unseen threats, refusing to obey commands, as if even animals recognized the unnatural essence that permeated the Donnellys' home. And historians who later studied the family would marvel not just at these eerie anomalies but at the psychological impact the family had on the entire region, creating a climate of fear so potent that every story, every whispered rumor, reinforced the notion that this was not simply eccentricity, but a living, breathing curse that clung to flesh and blood, leaving a legacy of terror and fascination that would echo through history, a darkness that seemed almost sentient, shaping the land and the minds of anyone foolish enough to trespass into their world. And as the Montana nights grew longer, and the fog thickened around the hills, the legend of the Donnelly's genetic curse only grew, leaving townsfolk to wonder how much of their fear was real, and how much was the mind bending under the weight of something far older and more sinister than anything they had ever known. By 1878, the Donnelly's shadow over the surrounding Montana hills had grown darker and more insidious, and neighbors began disappearing under circumstances so strange that fear gripped every nearby household like a living thing. Families who had once laughed and worked the land together now whispered behind closed doors, terrified of venturing near the Donnelly property, for some of their children were found lifeless in the woods, bodies twisted in unnatural ways, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams, while others simply vanished without a trace, leaving only empty beds and the echoes of footsteps fading into the night. And the villagers noticed a pattern: wherever the Donnellys were seen, strange disappearances followed, livestock would panic inexplicably, and an unnatural chill would settle over the land, pressing down like a warning from the earth itself, as if the hills, forests, and rivers conspired with the family to protect their dark secret. Travelers passing near the farmhouse spoke of faint lights moving through the fog, of figures watching from the windows, and of a feeling so oppressive that even the bravest turned back, hearts hammering as if the air itself was alive with anticipation. While some claimed to have heard the softest whispers calling their names, coaxing them toward the property, a voice that was both familiar and wrong, seductive yet terrifying, promising answers but delivering only dread, and the Donnellys themselves moved through this world with unnerving calm, pale faces shadowed under hats or hoods, eyes glimmering with a quiet knowledge of what was to come, orchestrating events in ways no outsider could perceive, leaving townsfolk to wonder if they were ever truly in control of their own lives, or if the family's curse had already ensnared them, threading its dark influence through the community like invisible roots, entwining everyone in a web of fear and suspicion, so that each disappearance became a legend, every story more horrifying than the last, until the hills themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation, keeping vigil over a secret that could only be described as malevolent, intelligent, and eternal, a darkness that would not rest until all who opposed it were consumed by fear. And the legacy of the vanishing neighbors became another chilling chapter in the Donnelly story, whispered around firesides, carried in shivering voices, and etched forever into the haunted history of Montana. Inside the shadowed walls of the Donnelly farmhouse, the family's reputation for darkness grew more sinister than anyone in the nearby Montana hills could imagine, for it was whispered that behind closed doors, the Donnellys conducted forbidden experiments, secret rituals that twisted both body and mind, a private obsession with purifying the bloodline that led to practices so macabre that those who dared glimpse them could scarcely comprehend the horror. Journals, carefully hidden, spoke of grotesque manipulations, of children observed with unnatural precision, of herbs and concoctions brewed in the dead of night, and of strange symbols carved into the walls, floors, and even the flesh of those who could not escape, while villagers swore that the echoes of the family's midnight ceremonies carried on the wind like a warning, chilling their bones as if the air itself had become sentient, carrying whispers of knowledge no human was meant to hear, and the children, pale-faced and unervingly still, seemed to understand things far beyond their years, sometimes smiling at invisible presences, muttering words that sounded like conversations with shadows, eyes flickering with a life that was not entirely human, as though some darkness had taken root inside them, shaping their minds into vessels for a purpose that outsiders could not comprehend, while the adults moved with deliberate calm, orchestrating every event with chilling control, silent as predators, calculating every gesture and glance, and even the land surrounding the farmhouse seemed to respond, trees bending as if to conceal the family's movements, the wind howling in warning, the fog thickening to hide whatever horrors took place within, and those few outsiders who stumbled too close often returned changed, haunted by visions they could not explain, their sanity fraying as though the darkness itself had touched them, imprinting fear and fascination into their very souls, leaving the town to whisper tales of unnatural lights, distorted shadows, and sounds no living creature should make, until the name Donnelly became synonymous with terror, a family whose curiosity for blood, life, and death blurred the lines of morality. and humanity, creating a legacy of horror that would persist long after the hills grew quiet, and as the fog swallowed the farmhouse each night, the invisible pulse of those forbidden experiments seemed to echo, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to draw near, to witness, and perhaps, never leave. Among the many horrors surrounding the Donnelly family, perhaps none was as chilling as the births that carried the weight of their cursed bloodline, for the villagers whispered of children born with grotesque deformities, eyes too large, limbs twisted, skin mottled with strange markings, and yet, the family regarded each child with a detached calm that unnerved even the bravest neighbors, as if they were observing the inevitable outcome of a centuries-old design rather than the birth of a human life. Some infants were hidden away from the prying eyes of the community, locked in shadowed rooms where only the family could witness their suffering and growth, while others disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the echoes of rumors that spoke of rites performed in secret, and of the family's relentless obsession with purifying and controlling their lineage, a philosophy that seemed more like worship of darkness than of life, and those who glimpsed the children reported strange behaviors. They would stare without blinking, speak in tones far beyond their years, and sometimes smile at empty corners as though speaking to invisible entities, terrifying anyone who dared approach. The very land surrounding the farmhouse seemed to pulse with unease, as if it recognized the unnaturalness of these births, the trees bending in mournful arcs, the wind carrying whispers of sorrow and warning, and animals fleeing the property in terror, avoiding a place where life and death danced in disturbing union, while the family's adults, pale and eerily calm, continued their experiments and rituals, moving with calculated precision, feeding the darkness that had taken root in both blood and soil. And the townspeople, consumed by fear and fascination, spoke in hushed tones about the tragic births that cemented the Donnellys' reputation as a family touched by something ancient and malevolent, a lineage cursed to carry the shadows of a past too terrible to name, leaving every witness to wonder whether curiosity or compassion would lead them to understand, or to fall victim to, the horrifying legacy of the Donnellys. And as the moon rose high over the foggy hills, illuminating the farmhouse in a pale, ghostly glow, the echoes of infant cries, distorted and unnatural, seemed to linger in the cold Montana air, a reminder that some horrors are born, not made, and that the Donnellys' dark legacy would continue, stretching its shadow across the land and the souls of all who dared speak their name. As the fog thickened over the hills of Montana, and the night air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, travelers and locals alike reported chilling sounds emanating from the dense woods surrounding the Donnelly farmhouse, for it was said that the family wandered among the trees at night, speaking in low, guttural chants, uttering words that no human could recognize, their voices carried on the wind like a whispering tide that seemed to pull listeners closer against their will, drawing them toward the property as though the very hills conspired to offer each trespasser to the darkness lurking within. And those who heard these murmurs described a creeping dread that wrapped around their hearts like cold chains, compelling them to flee even as some felt an irresistible curiosity urging them forward, while shadows moved unnaturally through the trees, elongating and twisting in ways that defied logic, and glimpses of pale faces peering from the underbrush, eyes glinting with unnatural intelligence, sent shivers down spines, leaving witnesses to question whether what they saw was human, or something else entirely, a force older then the mountains themselves, patient and malevolent, shaping events with unseen hands. And the animals were the first to sense it, fleeing in panic, refusing to enter the forest or approach the farmhouse, as if instinct recognized the unnatural essence that permeated the land. Even the wind seemed alive, carrying low moans that echoed through the trees like the whispers of the vanished, and the fog itself seemed to move with purpose, curling around roots and trunks, hiding paths and entrances that should have been visible, ensuring that those who dared approach became disoriented, lost in the labyrinth of fear, until panic consumed them and they returned to the village changed, pale-faced, trembling, haunted by whispers of voices calling their names, by shadows moving in impossible ways, and by the chilling certainty that the Donnellys were orchestrating these events with calculated intent, feeding on terror as though it were sustenance, their curse extending not just to the family but to the very hills and woods that enclosed them. Until the story of the Murmurs in the woods became legend, a tale of caution whispered in every home, a reminder that in Montana, at the edge of civilization, the Donnellys were never alone, the darkness was always with them, and anyone who strayed too close might never emerge unchanged. One bitter, fog-laden night, when the moon struggled to pierce the thick Montana mist, a stranger appeared in the village, gaunt and trembling, eyes wild with a terror that immediately silenced conversations and froze even the bravest hearts, claiming he had witnessed the Donnellys' darkest secret firsthand, a ritual so horrifying that it could awaken the blood and transform any who were touched by it into vessels of the family's malevolent legacy. His voice shook as he described pale children with unsettling knowledge, adults moving with a calm that was anything but human, and chants echoing from the woods in a language older than memory, calling out to the living with promises of power, only to ensnare them in a nightmare from which there was no escape. And though many dismissed him as a madman, a few villagers felt the icy grip of truth in his words, their skin crawling, hearts hammering, and a chill pressing against their very souls, for the stranger's presence alone seemed to draw the fog closer, as if the land itself responded to his warnings, amplifying their dread. And those who dared follow him to the edge of the Donnelly property claimed to see figures lurking in the shadows, eyes glinting with unnatural intelligence, whispering incomprehensible words that beckoned them forward, while the ground beneath their feet seemed to thrum with life, pulsing in rhythm with the sinister energy emanating from the farmhouse. And though they turned back, their minds haunted by what they had glimpsed, the village was never the same, fear becoming an almost tangible presence, wrapping around homes, twisting conversations, and suffocating curiosity, as the legend of the strangers warning spread, a chilling reminder that some secrets are far older and darker than human comprehension, that the Donnellys' curse was not confined to their family, but reached into the hills, the forests, and the hearts of anyone who dared to look too closely, and that one careless step into their world could mark a person forever, leaving them to live haunted by whispers, shadows, and a creeping certainty that the darkness they had glimpsed was patient, eternal, and always waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. The Donnelly farmhouse, already infamous across the Montana hills, had grown into a place of living terror, a house that seemed to breathe with a consciousness all its own, for travelers reported doors creaking open and shut without wind, shadows sliding along walls in impossible ways, and rooms that appeared to shift subtly when unobserved, as if the very architecture itself was alive, whispering secrets and feeding on fear. Those brave or foolish enough to enter spoke of icy drafts that wrapped around their limbs like fingers, of whispers curling around their ears in voices both human and inhuman, of glimpses of pale figures moving just beyond vision, and of a suffocating sense that they were being watched, not only by the family but by something far older, something that had taken root in the walls and floors, feeding on the terror of intruders as though it were nourishment, while the children, disturbingly calm, moved silently through the halls, occasionally smiling at empty corners, eyes glimmering with knowledge they should not possess, and the adults orchestrated the house's horrors with unnerving precision, their quiet movements like a conductor guiding a symphony of dread, and the surrounding land seemed to conspire with them, trees bending as if shielding the house, the fog thickening unnaturally, masking entrances and paths, disorienting anyone who approached, while animals fled the area entirely, sensing the malevolence that had infused the very soil. And villagers, speaking in hushed tones, claimed that the house itself was alive, a sentient entity shaped by generations of Donnelly darkness, absorbing the fear and despair of all who dared come near, storing it like a living memory within its walls, so that even after leaving, intruders carried a lingering chill in their bones, haunted by the sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every move. And the legend of the House of Shadows became one of the most chilling stories in Montana history, a cautionary tale whispered around firesides, warning that some structures are more than wood and stone, they are vessels for ancient, malevolent intent, and that the Donnellys had ensured their home would never let the darkness die, that it would always wait, patient and eternal, ready to ensnare the next soul foolish enough to cross its threshold. By the late 1880s, the once thriving Donnelly family had dwindled, yet the darkness that had clung to their bloodline seemed more potent than ever. And even as fewer family members remained, their presence cast a shadow that stretched across the hills and into the hearts of anyone who had ever glimpsed them, for the surviving children bore the legacy of unnatural births and inherited malevolence, pale faces framed by eyes that seemed to see beyond the veil of reality, calm voices that carried the weight of centuries of fear, and movements so deliberate and unnervingly silent that they could pass through a room without a sound, yet leave every observer trembling with unease, while the adults, when present, orchestrated events with the meticulous precision of those who understood that the true power of the family lay not in numbers but in the insidious reach of their influence, a darkness that could warp minds, twist perceptions, and leave entire villages in a state of unshakable dread. The land itself, steeped in fog and legend, seemed to pulse with a life all its own, echoing the whispers of vanished neighbors, amplifying every shadow, every crackling leaf underfoot, as though the hills remembered each tragedy and held it within their folds, ready to share it with anyone who dared draw near. And visitors reported glimpses of figures at windows, faint chanting from the woods, and a feeling of being followed by unseen eyes, their hearts pounding with the certainty that some force older than the mountains themselves was watching, waiting. Patient and eternal, feeding on fear, curiosity, and the very essence of life, while the few who studied the family's history later speculated that the Donnelly's curse had transcended death, embedding itself into the land, ensuring that even as the line diminished, their influence would persist, a malignant echo across time and space, and the hills of Montana, silent in the daylight, seemed to hold their breath at night, carrying the memory of every horror, every vanished child, every whispered warning, until the legend of the last of the Donnellys became a chilling testament to the idea that some darkness can never be extinguished, that some families leave a mark not on maps but on souls, and that even in their absence, the shadow of the Donnellys would haunt the living forever. Long after the last Donnelly had vanished from the Montana hills, the family's sinister legacy refused to fade, leaving behind a chilling silence that spoke louder than any voice could. For historians, paranormal investigators, and villagers alike continued to report strange phenomena, the lingering scent of decay in abandoned rooms, shadows that moved independently of the sun, whispers carried on the wind in languages no one could understand, and a feeling of being watched that clung to the bones of anyone who dared step near the ruins of the farmhouse, while the land itself seemed haunted, the fog rolling in with unnatural persistence, the trees bending as though bowing to an unseen will, and the hills holding every memory of the Donnellys' deeds, from the vanishing neighbors to the grotesque births, from the forbidden rituals to the murmurs in the woods, all woven into a tapestry of darkness that no time, no human effort, could unravel, leaving every curious mind to wonder whether the family's curse had truly ended or merely transformed, becoming a part of the land, a malignant presence feeding on fear and legend, quietly influencing events, drawing the curious closer, whispering promises that no mortal should hear, while storytellers and thrill-seekers repeated their tales, adding their own embellishments, until the Donnellys' name became synonymous with horror itself, a shadow that stretched across generations, reminder that some families are defined not by their lives but by the darkness they leave behind, and that some mysteries are so profound, so malevolent, that no answer can ever truly satisfy, leaving only the creeping certainty that the hills of Montana still remember, still watch, and that the Donnellys' influence, subtle yet omnipresent, may touch anyone who dares to speak their name or tread near the land where shadows linger, a chilling testament to the idea that some legacies are never solved, never ended, and that fear itself can be inherited, preserved, and passed down quietly, invisibly, for eternity.